Soon I will give the floor to our speakers. Just a few words about what we were hoping to achieve with this webinar. The coronavirus crisis situation has led to or contributed to a number of very worrying developments and events around the world. This webinar is focusing on the situation in Europe. And we will especially hear from activists based in Hungary, Poland, and Malta. And some of you might have noticed that just a few hours ago we had a very problematic development in Hungary that we're going to hear more about just in a few minutes. We will also get a broader European perspective from representatives from IPPF, the European Network, and also Center for Reproductive Rights. And our participants today, we have Irene Donadio from IPPF European Network. We have Tina Kolos-Orban from Transvanilla in Hungary. We have Lisa Caruana-Finkel from Voice for Choice in Malta. Ursula Gryczyk from Federation for Women and Family Planning in Poland, and Lea Hoctor from Center for Reproductive Rights. And we will start with Irene from IPPF European Network, who also has a presentation.
Thank you, Ulrika. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be with you today. And would like first of all to say a few words about the International Planned Parenthood Federation. IPPF is the largest organization working on sexual and reproductive rights and sexual and reproductive health in the world, and we are active in 170 countries. RFSU is our wonderful member in Sweden. So we are really happy to have the opportunity to give you a little bit of update on what is going on. And I want to present today a report that we did with the European Parliamentary Forum, and is really providing some insights on what is happening on the ground in Europe. It was done quickly at the beginning of the outbreak of the COVID-19 crisis. But still, I think it's important because it gives you an indication of what is happening. Next slide, please. Next. Yeah, thank you. So today I wanted just to quickly discuss the situation of access for women to all essential services, in particular having a close look at contraception and abortion. And of course, domestic violence and sexual and gender-based violence. Quickly go through the impact on European development cooperation, but also on civil society and NGOs and their sustainability. And finally, to end the presentation with 10 recommendations. Next. So I think that the first and most important issue to keep in mind is that access is becoming a big challenge all over Europe. So the access to services is limited. It's limited in terms of what states are providing, and is even limited in terms of what pro-choice organizations can deliver. Even in cases when we see ministries stating openly that the services are essential, that's what we saw, for example, in Italy and Romania, and partially in France, but not all the time taking enough measures to ensure that women on the ground can access them. We also want to underline that, of course, abortion has been a lot in the headlight, but in reality, we also have other problems. For example, the screening of HIV and sexually transmitted infections, as well as reproductive cancers, has been halted. And that's very dangerous. We also see troubles and challenges in terms of maternity care. We see particularly that, of course, COVID-19 is affecting everyone, but not everyone in the same way, and that particularly vulnerable groups are affected the strongest. I can think of Roma communities, undocumented migrants, sex workers, transgender people. There are a lot of groups that have been somehow forgotten in this crisis. But also, to conclude on a positive note, we will look at innovative responses. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah. So in relation to contraception, what we see is a scaling back of contraceptive care across Europe, all over. We see that women are not attending clinics, either because they cannot or because they are scared. We see also a big danger of short and long-term shortages of contraceptives and reproductive health supplies. I don't know if everyone is aware, but Malaysia is producing 1 out of 5 of all the condoms in the world, and a lot of contraceptives and other reproductive health supplies are also coming from Asia. That means that there is already, there was a potential stock out identified in Portugal or in Turkey, another country, Azerbaijan, but this could even impact the situation in Germany or in many other parts of the European Union. I also wanted to underline that some countries are facilitating access. Here, I like to talk, for example, about France and Portugal, because France has immediately in March taken some measures to ensure that women could access contraception, either by telemedicine, getting prescriptions on their phones, or using all prescriptions. Next, please. In relation to abortion, we clearly see that COVID-19 is exacerbating the usual barriers and all the medically unnecessary administrative barriers that have been put in different countries. But we also see a momentum to push for change. We've seen that cynical governments and politicians are using the crisis to try to undermine access, but we know that we have speakers for that. We also saw some countries that are not openly saying that they want to stop access, but in fact, by not moving and by not prioritizing sexual and reproductive health rights, they are allowing for this erosion of reproductive safety. And we definitely saw some very good practices, in particular in relation to telemedicines, medical abortion at home, and extending the limits also for medical abortion. And here, if you like, I will give you later on more information about Ireland, the UK, France, and other countries, but maybe during the question and answer session. Next, please. Of course, there's been a lot of attention devoted to the issue of gender-based violence, and we saw a huge increase due to the lockdown, but we also saw some very positive measures taken by some governments. I'm thinking now about France, about Spain, but of course about the UK. There have been many in Portugal, many very interesting initiatives to setting up new and flexible emergency warning systems, for example, in pharmacies and grocery stores, but also increasing funding and in organizing alternative shelters for victims, while others, unfortunately, are not taking measures, or like Hungary, are even moving in the wrong direction. Next, please. European development and cooperation. I mean, it's obvious that this is going to be a bomb and a disaster for cooperation and development. The service delivery points across 64 countries have been closed, and there is a massive issue around global solidarity. We also hope that this might be turned into an opportunity to look into the vaccine development and universal health coverage. But we certainly cannot deny there's going to have a very large effect on development aid overall, and that this will also disproportionately, we will see also effects on health and on the sexual and reproductive health and rights community. Next, please. We see that the survival of a lot of organizations in the sexual and reproductive health and rights field, on the women's rights, on shelters, could be jeopardized in this moment, and it's very, very important that further funding and support measures are introduced. Next. So I would like to conclude with 10 recommendations. First, we have to make sure that all emergency measures that are taken under COVID as a state of emergency really respect human rights and democracy and the rule of law. Then we absolutely need for policy makers and decision makers to adopt an intersectional and gender sensitive response to the crisis, because we don't want women to bear all the cost of the crisis. Next, please. We want to ensure that all sexual and reproductive health and rights are recognized as essential, life-saving, and time-sensitive services. I'm saying that because I've seen the opposition campaigning in many countries, trying to say that abortion or other services could be discontinued because they are not essential. Of course, we want governments to adopt policies and technical guidance with a very high quality standards, particularly promoting telemedicine, because that's been a solution, and also address immediately the needs for reproductive health commodities and protection, personal protection equipment. And also, very importantly, ensure that services and resources for the survivors or prevention of gender-based violence are considered essential services. All the measures that have been introduced should be continued and also should be further consolidated, because some countries are just creating some emergency measures for the last weeks, but then all these women have to also have a future. So we have to work on sustainability. Next. Support partner countries and developing countries in delivering on their health system, and very important, maintaining the financial environment for CSOs, because we've seen that we will have an enormous economic crisis, and this is going to be extremely dramatic for all civil societies. If you're working with the European Union, please help us keeping on the pressure on the European Union so that the contingency plan will include funding, and also the multi-annual financial framework proposal will also include sexual and reproductive rights and health and civil society. And last but not least, keep the focus on women's rights and gender equality, and particularly include sexual and reproductive rights in that, both at national and regional level, because otherwise it's going to be really a disaster. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I hand over to the next speaker, can you just quickly explain the word telemedicine a bit clearly for people who might not be familiar with it?
Yes. So telemedicine is all the services that you can access from a distance, remote medicine. So it can entail, for example, phone services. It can be video chats. It can be all the type of services you can get through the internet. So all the new technical solutions that allow people to access services without having to go physically to see a doctor or to see a specific office or premises. I hope it's clear.
Yes, thank you. I will hand over to the next speaker, and also remind everyone that please post your questions or comments in the chat kind of ongoing, and then we will try to have them gathered all at the end. But thank you very much, Irene. And now over to Tina Kolos-Orban, please.
Thank you, Ulrika, and I want to thank RFSU for organizing this event and inviting us. I think it's very important and crucial nowadays that we collaborate with each other and we talk to each other across movements. As I am coming from the trans movement, and I've been active in the past 11 years, mostly on trans issues, I'm happy to engage with those who are not that much deep working in this field. I'm one of the vice presidents of Transvanilla Transgender Association, which is the national trans rights organization in Hungary. And we've been advocating on legal gender recognition in the country in the past 6 years. And we entered a new phase today, which I will talk more about later. And I have also been involved in Transgender Europe during different times. I'm one of the co-chairs at the moment, so I kind of have an overview of the overall European situation regarding trans rights. But let's get back to Hungary, where I am coming from. And I think Hungary is very much covered in the news in the past years because of not behaving properly and not being a democracy. And I would like to raise awareness on how this government gained power in 2010 and how they managed to stay in power and kind of increase pressure on its own citizens. So the Fidesz and the Christian Democrats have gained 2/3 in the parliament in 2010, and that's where everything has started, because with 2/3 in the Hungarian parliament, a party can vote on anything and can change basically anything. and they kind of felt entitled to do so. So they have written the whole constitution themselves without consulting anyone. And it was ready by 2012, and we've been raising this issue on the EU level, and nothing happened. And then many things came after this, and we've been all the time raising this, and nothing happened. So this is one part of why this government can stay in power. And the other part of the story is that they have some voters. People vote for them, and they all the time do polls, and they measure how their voters feel, and they build on the fear and hate of their voters, and they go to the wall, and now it seems that they even break the wall, but they have enough people voting for them. If they wouldn't have that, then they wouldn't sit where they are. I mean, they have redrawn all the voting districts, and with less than half of the total votes of those who went to vote at the last parliamentary elections, they have gained 2/3 of the seats. So it's obvious that the system itself is not democratic 100% anymore. And now what they do with the power that they got and they maintain to have, they do all kinds of things. They all the time find enemies, usually outside of the country and sometimes inside. They have started a war on gender itself. The so-called gender ideology movement has kind of entered into Hungary, and these right-wing religious groups started to have influence on the government and its discourses. In Hungarian, we don't have a different word for sex and gender, and the same word was used all the time. But some years ago, 2-3 years ago, they more and more started to use gender to start to frame against the mere existence of gender, claiming that there is only sex and that's the end of the story. And in this war on gender, the government went that far that they have banned gender studies, because they believe that that's against family values or all kind of things that they believe in, or that's not a Christian thing and whatever. But this new word has emerged in Hungary. Gender was not used as gender, but we use the Hungarian word, which is nem. But it's more and more used. And then also there was the Istanbul Convention issue in Hungary. The same government with the same constitution has signed the Istanbul Convention and then never ratified. And they've been postponing and not answering on public calls from civil society and all kinds of actors to ratify the convention. And then the COVID situation has arrived to the country in the middle of March, and Orban have decided to have indefinite power to rule by decree, and he got his parliamentarians to vote on this. And this was called out by the EU and many other international institutions, Hungarian civil society. Even the opposition parties were okay to give him powers, but they wanted to have some time limit to this. But he refused to do so. So the coronavirus law, still in effect in Hungary, gives him power to rule the country by decree until he declares the COVID situation is over. There were claims that the parliament then will not be functional, and it's put aside. So what did he do? He proved that the parliament is functional and it's not put aside and it's making decisions. And on March 31st, on Transgender Day of Visibility, they came up with the idea that they should kind of take care of trans people who are fighting for a proper, quick, transparent, and accessible legal gender recognition for 6 years, because we had an administrative procedure which was functioning rather well in Hungary, but it was not codified. It was not legislated at all. So my organization was fighting for some piece of legislation which would secure the administrative procedure, which if would have been stopped at any day, then we could have gone to complain anywhere. So on 31st of March, the government decided that they will take care of this issue with outlawing legal gender recognition in the country. And the government itself have handed in a bill proposal, in an omnibus bill, amongst many other outrageous things, to say that there is only birth sex in Hungary, and that is defined by primary sex characteristics and chromosomes, and which will be registered for each and every Hungarian citizen, and it will not ever be changeable. this is against all international human rights standards, and it's also unconstitutional in Hungary, because the Constitutional Court at least 3 times have taken the stance that it's a fundamental right for trans people to change their legal gender. So the government has proposed this bill, and it went on for 6 weeks. They've been debating in the parliament. They've been defending themselves from the European Union, the Council of Europe, and the United Nations, and many other international actors have raised their voices. Civil society was outraged, but they didn't listen to anyone. And just today, I think about 2 or 3 hours ago, they had the final voting in the parliament. And at the moment in Hungary, it seems that there will be no legal gender recognition for many years. And it seems that nothing can stop mainly the prime minister from doing what he wants to do. And I mean, it's difficult for me to find words at this moment, because although I've been expecting this moment coming, I can tell you when your government puts a stamp on you being a second-class citizen, then you just cannot feel okay. So thank you for inviting me. And
thank you very much for joining us also on this day, Tina. We very much appreciate this. And I don't know really what to say either. This was expected, as you said, but it's still an extremely harsh reality to listen to, I think, for all of us. So I think we will come back to more questions later. I just thought about something. I see questions popping up, and we will gather them together at the end. And maybe Tina Kolos-Orban or somebody else can just explain the Istanbul Convention for people who might not be familiar exactly with what that is. Or maybe I can just say that it's a convention that deals with the topic of violence against women, you could say. So, but it has the word gender in it, which is then the reason for it being attacked, you could say. I'm seeing Tina Kolos-Orban is waving. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so can I just one thing, because I forgot to say that in the middle of these 6 weeks when we've been fighting against this law proposal on birth sex to be registered only, then the government have realized that they don't want to ratify the Istanbul Convention at all, and then in 2 days they pushed through the parliament a declaration that they reject the Istanbul Convention totally. The same government with the same constitution have signed the convention, and several days ago they decided that they reject it because it's unconstitutional and because of migrants and because of gender and all kinds of reasoning that is not valid. So yes, it's a convention which is about gender-based violence, and it uses the word gender, but it's not about trans people, and it's not about what they claim. And we have seen similar events in Bulgaria, very similar issues regarding the Istanbul Convention and trans issues, and the rejection of the Istanbul Convention based on similar things. So thank you.
Thank you very much for clarifying. We will move south in Europe to Malta, and Lisa Caruana-Finkel from Voice for Choice in Malta. Please.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you to Ulrika and RFSU for organizing this webinar. So I am an activist with Voice for Choice, which is the pro-choice coalition in Malta. We launched in March 2019, so last year, and we currently have 9 member organizations within the coalition. I am also involved in research on abortion in the context of Malta, and I volunteer with Abortion Support Network, which is an organization based in England that helps people get abortions, basically. I will be speaking about the challenge of abortion access for women and pregnant people in Malta. And I would like to start by giving a general background of the situation so that the impact of COVID-19 can be understood within this context. Malta has one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the world, and within the EU, it is the only country with a total legal ban. Anyone who has or assists with an abortion risks up to 3 years imprisonment. And there are harsher penalties for healthcare professionals. They risk up to 4 years imprisonment and also being struck off their professional register. This criminalization of abortion has a chilling effect on women and healthcare professionals, and it potentially endangers people's lives. So most doctors in Malta are reluctant to give information about abortion because of the fear of being criminalized, even though providing this kind of information, for example, on how to access abortions abroad, is actually not illegal. And then women who may need medical attention post-abortion may delay asking for help out of fear of potential legal repercussions. So the situation in Malta is also compounded by the immense stigma which is present within the country. Unfortunately, there are also anti-abortion groups in Malta who target women with misinformation, deception, and coercion in order to try to prevent them from accessing abortions. Despite these unfavorable conditions, estimates suggest that each year over 500 people from Malta access abortions. And to put this into perspective, the population of Malta is less than 500,000. There are two main ways that people from Malta can access abortions and usually access abortions. So they either travel abroad to a country where it is legally available, mainly to England, but people also travel to other European countries. And the second option is that they order medical abortion pills online, which is generally safe but illegal. Now, traveling abroad to have an abortion within the legal remits is never an option for everyone because of financial and mobility barriers for some. Now, for those who lack financial means, the Abortion Support Network has been providing financial assistance since 2019. But there are other barriers to travel. So, for example, teenagers, those in abusive relationships, asylum seekers in detention centers, people with disability, and single mothers without access to childcare face additional obstacles when it comes to accessing abortions abroad, and it might actually make it impossible for them to travel. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the problem of lack of local access to abortions. Barriers have always existed in Malta, but these have become more evident due to the current situation, and additional barriers have also been added. So to control the pandemic, Malta suspended all inbound flights from the 21st of March, meaning that the only way that women in Malta can have legal abortions abroad, for the most part, that's basically practically blocked. It's not an option. In fact, these travel restrictions have led to an increase in the number of people reaching out to activists and abortion support groups, and an increase in the number of requests for abortion pills. So those who may have otherwise chosen to travel abroad for the legal option are now resorting to abortion pills. But medical abortion pills are approved by the World Health Organization for self-management only during the first 12 weeks of gestation, which leaves those at higher gestational ages in a more difficult situation. Also, if there's a disruption in the supply chain or the postal services to Malta, that could mean that the medical abortion pills become unavailable. And so access to abortions may become completely blocked. In fact, there have already been some delays in receiving this time-sensitive medication. Reputable organizations that do provide medical abortion pills to Malta are Women Help Women and Women on Web. Unfortunately, we have recently become aware of a number of unverified and potentially unsafe and dangerous online sources that are offering abortion pills in Malta. And these have all been created between March and May, so during this pandemic. The pandemic has not only increased the requests for medical abortion pills, but it is likely to have also increased the actual number of abortions needed. And this is for a number of reasons, and it is not exclusive to Malta. So firstly, as Irene already detailed earlier, there have been warnings of potential global shortages of contraceptives. Secondly, there is a rise in domestic violence incidents worldwide due to lockdown and self-isolation measures, and this is something that has also been reported in Malta. And with this comes increased reproductive coercion and also rape. And again, and for others, job loss and income insecurity may have an impact on decisions of whether they decide to continue with pregnancies or not. Lived experience from Malta during this pandemic has already started surfacing. For example, a woman who recently accessed medical abortion pills anonymously shared her story. She experienced extreme anxiety as well as denial when she found out she was pregnant. And in the time that she waited for the medication to arrive, she searched online for herbal remedies and had daily suicidal thoughts. Another woman who was unable to purchase her usual contraception was raped by her abusive partner, and this led to an unwanted pregnancy. The reality is that in a country with substandard sexual and reproductive health and rights during a pandemic, People may resort to dangerous and unsafe methods in order to end unwanted pregnancies. People may self-harm and people may die. Interestingly, during this COVID-19 pandemic, the WHO European Regional Director has praised Malta's handling of COVID-19, stating that it is a country to follow. So obviously this was something that the Maltese government was very pleased with, and yet it fails to follow the same WHO when it comes to guidelines on SRHR. In fact, in recent years, Malta has received criticism on the state of SRHR from international bodies such as the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child, and the Council of Europe's Commissioner for Human Rights on various occasions. They have called for Malta to decriminalize abortion and to ensure safe access. Earlier this month, the Council of Europe's Commissioner for Human Rights specifically stated that the situation is particularly worrying for countries like Malta, where people cannot travel for care abroad. And in April, Voice for Choice signed a joint civil society statement initiated by the Center for Reproductive Rights, calling on European governments to ensure safe and timely access to abortion care during the COVID-19 pandemic. It makes specific reference to the countries where abortion is illegal or severely restricted, and that includes Malta. We will probably hear more about this from Leah from Center for Reproductive Rights. But Voice for Choice as a coalition, we forwarded the statement to local members of parliament, including the Prime Minister of Malta, but there has been no response. In fact, Malta's government has made no attempt to address and reform the country's restrictive abortion laws or in any way try to facilitate access to abortion care abroad during this pandemic. The current circumstances intensify the human rights violations of the state of Malta. These travel restrictions, which are required to control the pandemic, further highlight the fact that Malta's reproductive healthcare is sorely lacking. And this is why change is urgently needed. Because the longer the flight bans and the lockdowns last, the worse the outcome will be for those that need abortion care. And we cannot wait for the pandemic to be over before we decide to focus on SRHR, because abortion is time-sensitive, essential healthcare, and it must be prioritized during the COVID-19 pandemic. We should also not have to wait for a tragedy before enacting change, although I actually fear that that is what might shake up the state to realize the severity of the current situation. But I'd like to end on a more positive note. So since over the last year, since the launch of Voice for Choice, we have raised awareness on the situation in Malta. We have appeared on local and international media. We have also organized a number of events, and this includes Malta's first Rally for Choice, which was held in September last year on International Safe Abortion Day. So the taboo is slowly breaking, and pro-choice people in Malta are becoming more comfortable with publicly disclosing their views. And together we are challenging the status quo at different fronts. So we are addressing the social, the medical, and legal aspects. And we will continue fighting for SRHR, not only in the time of this pandemic, but also beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a privilege to listen to all of you with this very kind of on the ground and in-depth knowledge that you have of the situation in various countries. We will move to the next speaker, and also I can, of course, all speakers are also very welcome to comment on or question each other, of course, if you have something that you want to add or ask other speakers at the end of the seminar. But now we are moving to Poland, and Ursula Gruczyk from Federation for Women and Family Planning. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ursula Gruczyk from the Federation for Women and Family Planning. I am responsible for international advocacy there. I must just refer to, because usually we are in the more progressive company of EU countries, and now it was really, I just felt like being from Poland around Malta and Hungary, it just feels quite familiar, and it was really interesting to listen to you and hear about the similarities, as much negative as they are actually. Yes, I am to brief you on the recent developments in Poland as regards the proceeding of the two bills by the Polish Sejm a month ago. As you might be aware, in the midst of the pandemic, the Polish Sejm took up for the debate one bill that practically was to ban abortion services, and another bill which was to ban the sexuality education. These bills were a result of, they both are the civic initiative bills. And this means that at least 100,000 signatures have to be raised to present them to the Polish parliament. Just for your knowledge, for the bill on sexuality education, there were about 265,000 signatures. And for the bill for abortion ban, there were 830,000 signatures gathered for to present them to the Polish parliament. And since those were the civic initiative bills, formally they had to be proceeded by the Polish parliament because it had been under the obligation to debate them 6 months from the constitution of the new term of the parliament in November last year. However, we all know that taking into account the pandemic, the exceptional circumstances of the pandemic, the government, the parliament had all the reasons not to follow with the procedure and to postpone them, because those very important themes, they really merit a more in-depth debate. So I will just briefly introduce you what those bills were about. The first of them, the anti-abortion bill, was already known for Poland, and not only for Poland, because you might have been aware of that initiative from the 2000. It has been presented in 2017 to the Polish Sejm and undertaken for the first reading in March 2018. That's when the famous protests took place in Poland, and the bill got frozen in the parliamentary commission. The substantive provision of the bill is, the draft bill is to prohibit termination of pregnancy due to severe and irreversible fetal defects, which for Poland would mean a total ban of abortion, because 98% of abortions, they happen on this ground. This ban would also make it basically impossible to access reliable information about the conditions of the fetus and all the prenatal testing. There was a very there was a person who is quite known also in the anti-abortion rights movement that presented this bill in the parliament, a very famous pro-activist, pro-life activist, Kaja Godek, who is for many years using her personal case to fight against abortion. She's having herself a Down syndrome child and uses very much. The other bill that has been presented aimed at banning abortion. It was to introduce the changes in criminal code. Since in the criminal code at the moment we have this provision that criminalizes people who propagate or approve of pedophile behaviors in public. And for that crime, the perpetrators are subject to deprivation of liberty up to 2 years. And the draft bill was to introduce 3 additional paragraphs, one of which would be the criminalization of those who propagate or approve the undertaking of sexual activity by minors. And another paragraph in that draft bill was to criminalize those who propagate or approve this undertaking of sexual activity by minors in connection with the occupation of education, treatment, care of minors, or who act on the premises or school or other educational institutions. So as you can imagine, this is actually the great, in this paragraph lies the greatest danger for the sexuality educators, but not only, because if we assume the extensive interpretation of this provision, every person who speaks about the sexual development of minors, who talks about it as a normal aspect of a human development and growth, could basically could face the prison sentence. And this may be applicable to teachers, to carers, to educators, but also to those who issue leaflets, who write books or publications about sexuality for minors. So this is really this bill is a seed for legal traps and misunderstandings, because also in Poland one can have a undertake sexual activity at the age of 15, while this provision applies to people below 18, and this would mean that those in the from the age of 15 to 18 who can legally have sex would not have any access to information on sexuality education. And in the best case scenario, the people who could possibly provide the information would be just scared to talk about it. Even parents could be scared to talk about it. So those two bills were like full of absurds, without even mentioning how many international commitments of Poland, how many human rights obligations they would violate. This is like it would mean an exit from the EU or all the other European structures. But let me go back to what has happened, because as you know, those bills were rejected. They were not rejected. They followed the first reading, but they were sent to the parliamentary commissions. We don't see it as a positive result, because they could have been rejected. The parliamentarians didn't do it. They still prefer to freeze it. So they keep serving the parliamentarians as a kind of a blackmail for the movement. So we are quite disappointed, because it feels like the politicians bring up these women's rights burning issues when it suits them, like now we could see it in the situation of the pandemics, but they can do it in the moment, like let's say we would like to proceed with whatever progressive developments we would like to introduce. We were planning to do some wide campaign, preparing the society to kind of liberalize their laws. So if they bring it up like that, they can just intimidate that, impede us in whatever progressive actions we could. This was, I just wanted also to share with you that regardless of all that negative processing of those bills, women and and men in the Polish society managed to impressively gather their forces, and in this short period, I think it took about a week before the proceedings of the bill, the very impressive, innovative protests took place. We had car and bike protests on the streets, on different streets in Poland. The Warsaw Center was blocked the day before the voting. There were like artistic balcony displays happening on the buildings, on the balconies. People were protesting with the posters in the queues to the stores. So they used the legal means to show they protest without having the possibility to really like protest on the streets and gather as it would be possible in other circumstances. We also managed to run a very wide social media campaign. There were mass tweeting actions. We sent like 3 million of emails to MPs, which made the system block. The servers broke down for some. And of course, the international support was impressive. Many of you present here were of great help. So you know a lot about the process already. So without saying, I mean, many international organizations, our partner organizations were totally outraged with this development, lack of development in the situation of women's rights in Poland. So yeah, as I mentioned, I mean, we were very much affected by that, and it feels quite tiring and depressing to keep mobilizing. It feels like they just we are like marionettes in some performance that is being played by the ruling party, and they just make us go out and protest when they find suitable. So it's really very tiring to be part of that and keep reacting to what's happening. And also, as you know, as in other countries that are like Hungary, that the representative spoke here, we are under wider crisis in Poland, democracy and rule of law crisis. So we are like basically using right now the last independent institutions. Last week, the term of office of our president of the Supreme Court came to an end, and the new temporary substitute who was appointed comes from the very powerful right now in Poland, unfortunately, anti-rights group called Ordo Juris. To some of you might be familiar. And he was a founder of this organization, and now this person is the substitute for president of the Supreme Court. So this puts us all in complete despair, because we can imagine where it all can go, because the government basically speaks the language of anti-rights movements, anti-rights groups like Ordo Juris. The expert from this organization at the same time was appointed to the government group that is to fight and investigate cases of pedophilia, and I could just go on and on. Istanbul Convention is similarly now under the very precise eyes of those groups, and they keep denigrating the sense of it and putting it into this anti-rights rhetoric. So yeah, so that's just to give you the wider perspective on the situation of Poland, and I would like to thank you again for the support we have received, for all the international supports and solidarity that we have received during this crisis that happened a month ago, and I'm sure your support will be needed in the future, and I am already thankful for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Ursula. I see some heads nodding and some other questions have come in, but we will save all questions and comments until after the last presentation. So I welcome Leah Hochter from Center for Reproductive Rights. Welcome. Is Leah with us?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, great.
Yes. Oh, good. Sorry. It's funny, after 2 months of working remotely, I'm still getting used to the technological issues. Anyway, thanks a million to RFSU for hosting this very important discussion and for the opportunity to participate. Some of you will know the Center for Reproductive Rights, but many will not. And so I just wanted to explain who we are. We're a global human rights organization working to advance gender equality and reproductive rights and sexual and reproductive health and rights across the world. We use a range of methods, including strategic litigation, legal and policy advocacy, documenting reproductive rights violations, and we work across Europe and also in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the United States. And as Lisa mentioned, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we've been working with partners in a range of countries in Europe to analyse the impact that the crisis has had on sexual and reproductive health and rights, and to call on European governments and institutions to safeguard and guarantee these rights, and specifically to guarantee access to essential sexual and reproductive health care in the context of the crisis. As other speakers have outlined in different ways, the pandemic and the resulting restrictions on movement and liberty have significantly impacted individual sexual and reproductive health and rights across Europe. And I don't want to repeat the multitude of information shared by the others before me. I just wanted to kind of give a sense of the width and the breadth of the impact. So, for example, Austria, Croatia, Germany, Lithuania, Romania, Russia, Slovakia, and Italy. These are all examples of countries where, although abortion is legal, unlike in Poland or Malta, failures by governments in these countries to clearly designate abortion as essential healthcare and to ensure its provision throughout the countries during the context of the crisis has given rise to considerable access barriers for pregnant people seeking services during the past few months. Austria, UK, and Ireland are just some of the examples of countries where there have been really problematic impacts on access to contraception. Denmark, France, Greece, and the UK, these are examples of countries where access to assisted reproduction services has suffered, including the continuation of ongoing IVF cycles, which has then made lives very difficult for individuals engaged in those cycles. And then Slovakia and Czech Republic are just two examples of countries where the rights of pregnant people who are giving birth in a healthcare facility were severely restricted, not just the kind of example of having a companion with them during labour being prohibited, but other restrictions as well. So the pandemic and the related restrictions have impacted sexual and reproductive health and rights in a range of ways across our region. But of course, so too has it impacted all of our lives, not just our sexual and reproductive health and our lives in that sense, but all of the things we do on an ordinary day-to-day basis are now more complicated and more challenging. And a range of our human rights are restricted in terms of our freedom of movement and our liberty, and access to healthcare in general has been restricted and undermined in many contexts as our health systems have struggled to cope and have sought to respond to the pandemic. So can we see, or can we identify that whether or not there are particular things that are specific to sexual and reproductive health and rights that have led to some of the particular impacts that these rights have faced during this time? And are there particular lessons learned that we can draw and that we can bring to the attention of our policymakers and governments as we move into a different phase in the region in many countries in the crisis? And I thought it would be useful as the last speaker if I highlight three cross-cutting concerns and lessons learned in particular that I think we can draw out that apply in a number of European countries and apply to a number of sexual and reproductive health and rights issues. And the first of them is that sexual and reproductive health care, sexual and reproductive rights are an area in which in many, or I would almost say in the vast majority of European countries, there are still a range of legal and policy restrictions or medically unnecessary requirements that our governments apply and that impact or undermine our access to these forms of care, even in normal times. And then when a health crisis hits, such as COVID, these pre-existing policy barriers and restrictions are thrown into very sharp focus, and the harm that they can cause is hugely exacerbated. So we can take abortion as an example. It's just one example, but most European countries have legalized abortion. And yet in most of these countries, there still remain in place pre-existing legal and policy barriers, medically unnecessary requirements for access to abortion that are really wholly out of date with current public health guidance and best practices. And these barriers and medically unnecessary requirements predated the pandemic. They predated the emergence in Europe of COVID. But the harm that they cause and the gravity of their impact increased hugely during the crisis. And requirements and barriers that were always wrong, but that most people found ways to work around. Things like mandatory counselling requirements, mandatory waiting periods, requirements that women undergoing early medical abortion take the first of 2 abortion pills in a clinical setting, requirements in some countries that abortion be provided only in hospital settings. All of these pre-existing requirements in the context of the COVID crisis became things that placed women and healthcare workers' health and safety at risk, and in some countries gravely undermined access to abortion. And I think European governments now have the opportunity to address and remove these pre-existing barriers and medically unnecessary requirements. And the lessons learned from the pandemic showcase the real and immediate harm they can cause when a crisis hits, things that in normal times are not good, but that we can find ways around as individuals, can cause grave, deep harm when a crisis comes. As Irena said, there are some good examples of countries that have, in the context of COVID, waived some of these barriers. And the question now is, for all of us, is will they sustain these positive measures? Once the pandemic ends, will they revert to problematic laws and policies? And I think that has to be our focus now in terms of sustaining and maintaining good measures where they have been introduced. I think also Lisa's presentation highlights the fact that the crisis has called time on Europe's remaining highly restrictive abortion laws. The impact of these laws on people's lives is very grave always. In the context of COVID-19 pandemic, it is now the harm that they are causing. I think it now means that this situation is untenable, and we believe it would be shameful for other governments in Europe and for European institutions to continue to turn away from these situations and to continue to say these are not issues that we are going to involve ourselves with. Second, the other cross-cutting issue or lessons learned that I wanted to highlight relates to the fact that in many countries in our region, health systems and social systems were not prepared for a pandemic of this scale, and they did not have measures and plans in place to guarantee the continued provision of important time-sensitive healthcare, which has had a significant impact on individual sexual and reproductive health and rights. And so a key lesson from the COVID-19 crisis has to be that European governments must invest in their health systems. They must structure their health systems in such a way so as to ensure that when a crisis does hit, important time-sensitive healthcare, such as sexual and reproductive healthcare, can continue to be provided safely to those who need it. Because the denial of time-sensitive sexual and reproductive healthcare has long-lasting harmful impacts that are simply not irreversible. And similarly, European governments and institutions must invest in and prioritise social service provision and measures to guarantee sexual and reproductive rights that go beyond health systems, but that protect the sexual and reproductive rights of those at risk. So I'm talking, for example, about women or others in our societies who are at risk of intimate partner or sexual or domestic violence. And these individuals, we all know, have paid a very high price in many of our countries in recent months for the longer term past failures of our governments to ensure prioritisation, financial investment and sustainability of these services. And the third and final cross-cutting concern that I wanted to highlight relates to how and Ursula and Tina spoke so vividly about the situation in Poland and Hungary. But these are two examples of the many countries in our region which are witnessing backlash and attacks on gender equality, sexual and reproductive health and rights, the rights of LGBTI individuals across our region. In some countries, but not all, this backlash is connected to growing nationalism, fascism, anti-Gypsyism. And the thing is that this backlash, the attempts of anti-choice, anti-LGBTI, anti-equality movements don't stop just because we are in a public health crisis. And I think it is now critical that governments and institutions in Europe that do not share these anti-rights, anti-equality values step up and take this backlash seriously. And it is also critical for all of us in terms of our own lives, in terms of our own work in civil society, to do what we can in our own societies to hold the ground against these forms of backlash. And if we do not take this action and work together to take this action when things are normal, then I think what we've learned is that our ability to stem this backlash when we are in a crisis is weakened and undermined. So I'll stop there and delighted to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all the speakers. We have another 25 minutes and we have some questions that came in the chat. So I'm going to start with posing a few of them, and then I think we will also end with all of the speakers being given the floor once more for some final words, and maybe then we can focus on what we would like to see now, like what can governments do, and what would you expect from the European Union, and any kind of input to civil society representatives, any of that as an ending. We have had a few questions that kind of relate to, I'm assuming this is because ILGA Europe and Transgender Europe just recently presented their maps and their rankings of the different European countries, and then many people have noticed that Malta is again at the top of the ILGA Europe ranking. So people are then wondering, and this is a question that has been posed many times, I'm assuming, to Maltese representatives, like why all the successes then on the LGBTI rights in Malta, and meanwhile reproductive rights are not at all doing well in Malta at the moment. And interestingly enough, we also then have representatives from Hungary and Poland here also, and if I remember correctly, then it was now Hungary was the EU country who got the most deductions in their points in this ranking from ILGA Europe, and Poland was labeled the worst in the European Union. So the development is going in the wrong direction in many countries, and also then this difference in some countries we see a very clear difference in LGBTI rights and reproductive rights, and in others maybe those are going on a downwards spiral, all of them together. So, but I'll start with Lisa, then reflecting on this situation in Malta, and then maybe we have a short comment from Tina and also Ursula. Lisa, please.
Okay, so with regards to the progress in LGBTIQ rights, I think it's really important to see positive developments, of course, but we also need to look at the fact that the legal situation might not necessarily reflect the social context and reality. There is still a lot of stigma towards the LGBTIQ plus community, and in fact, MGRM, which is the Malta LGBTIQ rights movement, has recently stated after the publication of the ILGA that they look forward to keep working to close the gap, so that to bring the legislative changes down to the societal realities, because they can see that it's not exactly in line with what we see within society. So the thing is that it's likely that positive gains for LGBTIQ rights was regarded by politicians as a way to gain the trust and vote of the LGBTIQ community, whilst not compromising to a large extent the support of the general population. So the general population in Malta is largely against abortion. And I believe abortion is still more of a taboo in Malta. And yeah, so many people are actually very much against it. As activists, we have been emphasizing on the fact that, you know, abortion as essential healthcare should not rely on majority opinion. But things are changing. So there are people who are changing their views, and pro-choice people are, you know, being more comfortable with saying that they are pro-choice. But there's still a lot, we still have a lot of work to be done, basically.
Why do you think that Malta is still the only EU country then with a total ban? We heard from Poland what the development is, but still Malta is the only EU country. Why is that, do you think?
Yeah, I think it is for a number of reasons, but the overarching ones, I would say, are the fact that Malta is a small island nation, and because of religion, and specifically Catholicism. There have been a number of years of indoctrination within the country, and even though the Catholic Church is not as powerful as it used to be, religion is still an important aspect of everyday life. In fact, even, for instance, in secondary schools, during the religious lessons, they are taught that abortion is wrong. It's wrong in all circumstances, in cases of rape, in cases of fetal anomalies, that it is basically killing an unborn baby within the womb. So that's kind of the answer that they have to give to gain their points on exams. Some students are still shown the silent scream which is an anti-abortion propaganda film from the 80s. And also have to think about the fact that for about 25 years, until 2013, the Nationalist Party, which is a Christian democratic conservative political party, was in power in Malta. It is always hard to challenge the status quo, but I think it is more difficult within a small country where lots of people know each other. It kind of makes it a bit more difficult. Some people find it difficult to even say that they are pro-choice because this could lead to family relations being affected. It could potentially lead to losing career prospects, and organizations can also lose funding just by saying that their position is that of being pro-choice, because people feel very strongly about this issue. But I think I would also need to look at what has kind of the social legal changes that have occurred in Malta in recent years. Some people say that the situation in Malta is very similar to how it was in Ireland about 30 years ago. So if we look at divorce, for instance, this was only legalized in 2011, which is very, very recent. And even if we look on specifically SRHR, so the morning after pill, emergency contraception, was only approved for use in Malta in late 2016, which is only a few years ago. And this was following a judicial protest by Women's Rights Foundation in Malta. And even there was a lot of backlash against this. And even now, a couple of years later, it's not stocked in all pharmacies. Pharmacists can act as conscientious objectors on emergency contraception. And a recent study that I was involved with, we surveyed medical doctors on their views on abortion and reproductive health care. About 30% said that they do not agree that the morning after pill should be available in Malta. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to kind of change the mindset, I guess.
Thank you. I hear you describing the difference then in mindset in the general population between the support for LGBTI rights and then abortion rights. So that's the explanation for the difference then, maybe. So in Hungary then, would you like to reflect something about the situation on LGBTI rights versus reproductive rights, Tina?
Yes, Hungary is rather different in that sense. Abortion is widely accessible in the country, and the government was trying to raise the issue. They have even created campaigns from EU money, which was a bit interesting. But I think, as I said, the government is going after polls and they are measuring what their actions are resulting in their voting basis. And I believe that support for abortion in Hungary is widespread. So that's why, even though they would like to touch the rules and the system, they are afraid of touching it because that wouldn't be good for them, the reaction from society. So that's why we don't see such attacks on that particular thing in Hungary. Instead, they find the themes that they can use and where society will not really be moved that much. And regarding LGBTI rights, Hungary on the paper looks good. Implementation is lagging behind legislation. So Hungary was really ranked well in the list of EU countries, but has dropped severely from 2012. I think Hungary was listed 9th of Europe's list. And this year, Hungary was listed on the place 27. So that's a dramatic drop because of new measures introduced, which were not followed by Hungary since then. And also because legal gender recognition is not possible anymore. And because public events are not protected properly by the state anymore.
We also got a specific question about a registered partnership in Hungary.
So far, the government didn't take away existing rights. I think it's the first thing on trans issue that they take this brave step. We don't know what follows. A registered partnership is existent and people can enter into them.
Okay. Thank you very much. Ursula, would you like to reflect on the situation for LGBT rights in Poland compared to reproductive rights?
Yeah, sure. we were actually not so surprised to see the ILGA report, because I think that the LGBTI people are, for many years now, under the focus of anti-rights. They are the main enemies. They are really the how to say, they are the main, they trigger the most of hate coming from the anti-rights movement. And it happened with the bill on sexuality education that I described. Gathering the signatures, for example, under this bill was within the campaign against pedophilia, but this put under attack the LGBTI people because they were constantly being associated with acts of pedophilia. So, for example, even in this campaign that gathered 830,000 of signatures, people were asked not if they support the ban on the bill on sexuality education. They were asked, are you against LGBTI people? And some people were just answering those direct questions in the completely manipulated campaign. So this is just an example of many, many actions which put LGBTI people as a target. So within this campaign, then the president of Warsaw, who made the LGBT declaration, has been completely harassed against. He had to withdraw the declaration. The LGBT, without even, like, you know, the LGBT zones, LGBT-free zones that have been a huge, completely outrageous thing that has happened in the recent months, because as you may know, the local government started to sign so-called charters for family, for protecting the family values, which were very often directly or less directly attacking the rights of LGBT people, or excluding whatever other forms of family units that could happen in the society. So the activists from one of the NGO in Poland advocating for LGBTI rights made the Atlas of Hate, and they are under attack. They are legal suits against them, because this group that is behind the Atlas, so-called Atlas of this Charter of Family Rights, they deny that it is LGBT-free zone. So now they are defending themselves, saying that this has nothing to do with LGBT people. This is only for protection of family values, etc. So we have many legal suits that the activists are being sued for calling the for taking whatever advocacy actions, for calling things by their names. So the vice president of Poland, who attacked that initiative, he has also been sued. So really, for me, all those developments that I'm just describing, they really added to the rhetoric that is being so much favored by the government, that enters into mainstream, and people just fear, and activists are really under huge attack, and this has been reflected in this sad for us, very sad for us survey. I would not like to place it in comparison with SRHR really, because they are both quite negative at the moment. So, I mean, I spoke about it before, just putting it in maybe within the more current pandemia lenses, the situation, the pandemia crisis just shows how the health system is also facing crisis. Because there are not, it's very difficult to access whatever health services in Poland. So those ones, like, let's say, which are a bit controversial for Polish practitioners, like, let's say, writing an emergency contraceptive prescription, they became even more difficult But very often, just because of the fact that there are no doctors available, the 1/6 of the practitioners are considered to be infected by the virus. So many are not available to come to work, basically. So I think that the general picture is that apart from the already difficult situation in access to SRHR rights and services, the pandemic showed how the whole health system is in big crisis, and it of course affects even more the services that some doctors in normal conditions just don't provide. So it just makes it easier to refuse or not to be available. So there are like these objective and subjective factors that make it quite complicated overall in Poland. So that would be all that I consider worth sharing.
Thank you very much. We have another 10 minutes for this, and I wanted to ask Irene and Leah two shorter questions, and then also it would be interesting to hear from you from the three different countries, if there's anything that you would like to see from other governments, or like what you would like to see from the EU or other governments as a final reflection. But first I would like to hear from Irene that what do you think about, you had a number of recommendations, 10 of them at the end of your presentation. What are the chances of achieving success, do you think, with these recommendations?
As I said, I see the COVID-19 crisis as a crisis, but also as an opportunity, because it's really putting the spotlight on all the things that are not working well within the healthcare system, within societies. It was not surprising for us to see that the countries that have reacted faster and took the best measures, like Ireland with a new quality of care, the UK or France, are the countries where there was a social movement recently, and there's been a huge debate, and there is clearly accountability, you know, in terms of delivering care to people. And it was also extremely intelligently done by, for example, in Ireland, they didn't change the law, they looked at the interpretation of the law. And I think that's something that can be done in other contexts. But we are aware that the problems that existed have been amplified, as Leah underlined. So clearly it requires a lot of work on the ground and having a bit of this sandwich effect. And I wanted to hear from Lisa and Tina. I know a bit more, discuss more often with Ursula about what can be done, because I think that you need that movement in the country, and you need that international pressure or European pressure from outside, but that alone cannot bring to the results we want. For me, it's also extremely important, that something that has been said, that what is happening is not purely simply backlash. It's really a very calculated move, or very often based on data around what people feel strongly about, what they are afraid of. And there is a whole process of demonization and attack towards a certain group, certain communities, certain topic, which goes into a bigger process of de-democratization, of challenges of democracy. Ursula underlined that, Tina underlined that. And I think it's extremely important if we as a community make people understand that this is not only a woman's issue. This is not only a question for a lesbian or transgender or bisexual. This is a much bigger piece. This is a power struggle between different geopolitical powers to influence what's going on in Europe, to even destroy our, our welfare system, our economic system, European Union. So it's something that people have to be aware that you don't only have to be trapped into different divergent opinions on controversial issues, but you have to really understand what is at stake and how this is very intelligently done. In some others, I think if you take what I wanted to call the countries where you have the silent erosion, because as Leah also pointed out, some countries have good legislations, but they're not doing enough to implement this legislation. They're not doing enough to ensure access for people to care. there you have to work again on some social movements or some particular pressure to convince reluctant, timid governments. Even when they are progressive, they are a little bit too timid when it comes to our issues, to kind of blame and shame them or constructively discuss on the side to help them finding solutions. And I think it's very, very important if we do that and we show the values there behind it, the importance to people's life, we can win. And I think we have an opportunity really to improve the situation now.
Thank you for ending with on a hopeful note.
I have lots of hopeful things, but no time. Sorry for Leah, because she has the right to speak and all the others. Otherwise, I would go for another 3 hours about the one we could do.
Well,
but okay.
And I will give the word to Leah if you have any final reflections, maybe building on what Irene said. And then I think the last words, but they have to be quite short then, to the 3 country representatives, if you have any kind of what are you thinking should be done and what will you do and what can others do. But first, if Leah has any final reflections, please.
Yeah, I suppose I think that we have to use the positive examples where we have seen positive changes, where governments have removed certain problematic pre-existing barriers or have waived them or reinterpreted them. I feel like we have to take advantage of those, and we have to ensure that those governments, when the so-called crisis ends or things go back to normal, that they don't then go back to the normal way of doing things beforehand. And that will be the first step in the region. The countries that have initiated some good measures are diverse enough that I think we can use them in the region to say this is possible and this is the way we can take steps forward. I also think that we have to get better, and this I would also be very interested to hear from Ursula and Tina and Lisa, is we have to get better at working together as a movement, both movements that deal with specific issues within broader SRHR family or within movements across countries or across the region. And I feel like we have to really work out together how we can sustain and support each other as these things occur, as we seek progress or as we seek to halt regression. And that until we join up those dots more efficiently and better, the opposition movement, which is happy, they are happy to work together across lines of borders or issues. And they are already doing that. We have to do that as well, I think. And I also think we have to think outside of the silos of our own, of SRHR too. Often this is anti-human rights. This is anti-gender equality. It's also anti-gypsy, anti-democracy. And therefore we have to join those dots and be less siloed in our own communities or our own movements, I think, if we are to be successful.
Thank you very much. And now, Lisa, Ursula, and Tina, you have been given lots of things to potentially reflect on, and you have kind of 1 minute each. So please, Tina first, please.
Okay, I will try to be really quick because I agree with what was already being said, that we should work together and we should join issues and fight together. And I think from the EU, from the Hungarian perspective, we would clearly expect to name and blame countries, and we would expect other EU member countries to blame and shame Hungary. Because what we have seen in the coronavirus pandemic, Hungary was not named, even signed an EU declaration which was supposed to be against Hungary. So EU shouldn't give place to that. It has to be named. Even Helena Dalli refused to speak about Hungary around legal gender recognition, saying that she will not talk about any specific country, but only in general. And then condemning what Hungary was doing. Then why not saying Hungary is doing something that is shameful? So that's a clear demand from our side. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving to Poland, and Ursula.
Yes, so I would just underline what has been said, because I think that the global context is very important, because we are not talking about only women's rights, LGBT rights. It's just concerning everyone to whom the human rights values understood broadly matter. When it comes to Poland specifically, I think that with the bills I've described, we are really, we should be out of the EU with all the rest of the initiatives that are happening, with the judiciary being in the hands of one ruling party. We should be out of the EU, and the EU countries and the institutions should say it clearly that this is not a partner for the Union. Of course, I would not wish for my country to be out, but the values that are underlying the existence of the EU are more important than everything else, so it cannot be compromised. Then, of course, for working together is another amazingly important aspect, because we kind of try our best, I have an impression, and still there is lots of improvisation. We kind of act on hot spots that happen. So for sure, it should be maybe more systematic, more kind of on daily basis cooperation. So yeah, I think that all those points are just equally important to be dealt with and addressed. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And the last speaker of the day then, Lisa, please.
Yeah, so I agree with everything other speakers have said. I think that international support is crucial, and we need to work together as a community. So we hope to see more organizations and also more EU support for so that there's a push for change, and so that laws in Malta, in other countries where abortion is severely restricted, comes in line with the recommendations of the most reputable healthcare and human rights organizations. With regards to multi-government, we'd like to see more engagement with these issues and not for them to ignore SRHR. And I also, so recently the European Parliament held a vote on an action plan to combat the pandemic and its consequences. So Malta has MEPs and they all voted in favor of the whole plan, action plan, but there was a particular resolution which called specifically on member states to guarantee safe and timely access to SRHR, which included emergency contraception and also abortion care. And of the Maltese MEPs, only one voted in favor. The others either voted against or abstained. I mean, even that one is actually hopeful, but we'd like to see more support because I think that human rights and health matters should be prioritized and not just political gain. That's it. Thank you.
Those were very good words to end this seminar with, and we have passed the time with a couple of minutes. So this is the last that's going to be said today from this the panelists today. Thank you all very, very much for joining us today. This was very interesting, and the engagement from the audience, I think, also speaks clearly to that. And we hope to see you again and also stay in touch and continue to work together then, that you all have stressed the necessity of. So thank you everyone, to all the speakers and all the participants for joining us on this Tuesday evening. And yeah, let's. I hope that we all feel empowered and more encouraged to work even more together. And see you soon. So bye.
Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you.